here is Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports as well. He joins us on 365 Sports. Shehan, I saw the note. I saw the quote from James Blanchard about the transfer portal and NIL and more. And if anyone didn't see that note, I have it right here. There's a picture of James Blanchard. Texas Tech GM James Blanchard on underpaid elite recruits. If somebody is underpaying an elite guy, only paying him $100,000 to $200,000, I'm going to give him $300,000 to $400,000 and go steal somebody. Now, the reactions, as you know, are all over the place. And you had a few reactions and thoughts about it yourself.
Yeah, well, I think that people are kind of looking at what Texas Tech is doing and thinking that they're maybe doing something untoward or under the table. But here's the reality, right? And obviously, I've had many conversations with people around that program over the offseason. They're trying to be aggressive, and they're trying to find a strategy that no one else is really employing. And when you talk about that quote from James Blanchard, they believe that there is untapped potential in the recruiting marketplace. Of course, Felix Ojo was kind of their headliner, signing a big money deal as a high school recruit. They're also looking at another player in the class of 2027, a defensive lineman that they have connections to. And they believe that high school recruits in many cases are undervalued. There are a lot of players there's a lot of programs rather that are going to use their money aggressively for players in the transfer portal, maybe to retain guys on their roster. Well, Texas Tech wants to kind of have a different approach. They want to build from the ground up, and they believe, look, if we get a guy on campus as a freshman with a maybe slightly inflated deal, it'll actually save us money in the long term and create a good deal for us.
Yeah, and look, now that things are moving in the direction of maybe some multi-year contracts, like that's where you get them in. Now, I don't know, like, again, without collective bargaining and all these different things, but it's for a school like Texas Tech, I mean, their whole thing, you were there for a long time. It was, why not us? Like, I get that people may be a little uncomfortable with what they're doing, but how else are they supposed to make a stamp if they just say, well, we've always just been who we are? We're just going to be who we are.
And here's the thing exactly, right, is that when you are Texas Tech, and let's take a step back. If we're in a situation where every single program only can offer the same amount of money to every single player, well, like, that's a disadvantage for a program like Texas Tech that does not have the same level of history, the same reputation of coaches, all this sort of stuff, right? So what Texas Tech and programs like it kind of have to do is they have to be unique and they have to be aggressive. And you mentioned the idea, for example, of multi-year contracts. On the Felix Ojo deal, I've heard it's a 3-year, essentially guaranteed contract. Now, not at the number that was reported, but at a very high number. As opposed to when I spoke to Steve Sarkisian at the Texas High School Coach Association back in July, he said, we really aren't guaranteeing any multi-year deals because it's a bad situation for us. We have to lock into a multi-year deal with them. There's no guarantee that a player will have to be enforced a multi-year deal with us. So it's essentially a one-way contract in that sense. And the deal, too, when you sign a freshman high school recruit to a multi-year contract is, look, if you get, Arch Manning, if you get one of the elite players in the sport and they deliver elite results, then that's a fantastic deal. The issue is, if you look at the history of recruiting, there are plenty of players who were even top 5 to 10 recruits who didn't pan out. And let's say, for example, that you give $800,000 to an offensive line prospect for 3 years, and that guy doesn't end up being a starter for you. Well, that's $800,000 a year of a $20.5 million cap across your athletic department that all of a sudden is dead money. And nobody at this point has really had to manage dead money to that point. Again, it's a risk we're taking for some programs, but it's also a different way of doing things than especially some of the big boys.
Yeah, and it's something that if you don't hit, like you said, it's dead money if they were to put this thing together correctly. But are they unlimited in how much right now because they're on this roll? And I think it's great somebody from the Big 12 is actually making noise because everybody else, they're all about the same. All these teams are about the same, the programs, et cetera. Is there a drawback to this? What could go wrong, if anything? That they have a bunch of overpaid players that can't play?
Yeah, I mean, look, think about it in terms of NFL. Think about it in terms of NBA. If you sign Bradley Beal to a $60 million contract and the cap is 110, well, all of a sudden it's like you are in a really, really tough situation for trying to build a roster around them. And so ultimately, again, if you put that much money towards one player, they have to deliver. When you're in the NFL and you sign a player to, let's say, 10% of your salary cap, it's because they are a proven commodity. And when you look at a lot of the players that are being prioritized in the transfer portal as well, a lot of them are guys who we already know are good college football players. Even if you want to look at quarterbacks like John Mateer, Darian Mensah, a linebacker like David Bailey, this is an investment in somebody who has never played college football before that could potentially hamstring you if this player doesn't work out. And by the way, let's even put to the side the idea of just player not panning out. What if a player gets hurt? What if a player misses 2/3 of the season and he takes up $1 million of your payroll? That's something that you're going to have to reckon with. So for every bit of upside that there is, there's a lot more downside than people realize as well.
Shehan, Texas is number one and in many preseason polls, including the coaches poll. Why is that justified, or why is it not justified?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't realize this as somebody who knows Texas as well as anybody. They have never been number one in the preseason polls until this year. Like, that is just unbelievable to think about. But, I do think it is justified. But I will say also, this is one of the toughest years that I've ever had trying to nail down a number one team, because every single team that's contending, and there, by the way, are 6 or 7 teams that I think have a very reasonable chance and a very reasonable case for being number one. All of them have flaws, right? I mean, because it's not just Texas. Texas has to replace their entire offensive line. They've got a new quarterback. They've got to replace a lot of their best players in the secondary. Georgia, right? Georgia is replacing a whole lot of talent. Notre Dame's got a new quarterback coming in. Penn State hasn't necessarily had the success at receiver that they need to have. Oregon is replacing the vast majority of their talent. So, you go down and down the list, and there isn't, to me, a consensus number one team. By the way, Ohio State also, they're replacing their entire defense, stacked with players who are playing in the NFL right now. So, there isn't an obvious team to be consensus number one. I think that Texas is as good a choice as any for a couple of reasons. One, defensively, they lose some guys on the back end, but on the front end, they should have the best front seven in all of college football. Anthony Hill at linebacker, Colin Simmons at edge rusher, I think, is going to be a first-team All-American this year. You get CJ Baxter back at running back, and they do bring back at least 2 players on the offensive line. And by the way, that doesn't even get into that Arch Manning conversation. So I think that this is a team that you have a lot of faith in. They're the only team in college football over the last 2 years to be in the national semifinals each of the past 2 seasons. And this is a culmination year in so many ways. So again, lots of teams that I think there are lots of teams that deserve conversation for number one, but I think that Texas is a pretty worthy choice to be number one.
I think the only thing that you never know, because sometimes who you play, even if it appears to be one of those teams that's kind of in the middle, you never know when somebody's a little bit better or you just have a bad day. They've been in a pretty good run. They have been. There's been a couple of games, like the Kansas State game. Remember the last year they were in the Big 12? Wasn't it the Kansas State game when overtime, when they were inside like the UT5 and David, Will Howard just threw up all over himself. But they have been to look at what Sark has done from his story personally, which is an incredible success story. But they were lost in a wilderness. And it doesn't mean that he just waved a magical wand, but it's kind of remarkable what he's actually done at a place that was underachieving for almost a decade or so.
Well, look, and let's look at, the last year or two, right? Yes, they didn't win the national championship. They kind of messed up opportunities in their national semifinals games, but we're able at this point, because of what he's built, to call it kind of disappointing that they only played in the national semifinals each of the last 2 seasons. So I think that they've done such a great job. And Steve Sarkisian deserves a lot of credit for that. He obviously has brought 2 former #1 overall quarterback recruits to campus, and Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. I think that he's done a great job of building a staff, keeping them happy, keeping them on campus. And I also give a lot of credit, though, to their athletic department and Chris Del Conte. I think that they did a fantastic job of being ahead of the curve when it was time to institute things like NIL and transfer portal. I think that right now they are the model for every other program in college football, with the way that they've built through the trenches, the way that they've retained talent, the way they've identified and recruited talent. Also, by the way, yes, this is the first year that they're #1 in the preseason polls. They also just put together their first ever #1 recruiting class in the modern recruiting era. So this is a program that, while they may or may not win a national championship next year and the year after, they are right now the model for how you build a college football program in this era.